It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Richard Caldwell, a billionaire entrepreneur known for his aggressive business tactics, was strolling through the busy streets of downtown New York. His expensive tailored suit caught the eye of many as he walked past high-end shops and expensive restaurants. He wasn't just any businessman, he was the founder and CEO of Caldwell Innovations, a global tech empire that was constantly pushing the boundaries of the modern world. But on this particular day, something would happen that would shake him to his very core. Richard had just finished a meeting with his board of directors, and as always, his mind raced with thoughts of profits, acquisitions, and new projects. He needed a break. His stomach grumbled, and he spotted a small, quaint food cart on the corner, a rare sight in this part of the city. The cart had a line, and it was drawing the attention of even the city's wealthiest residents. Curious, Richard walked up, intrigued by the crowd. The sign above the cart read "Gourmet Tacos, try the best in town." He felt a tug of temptation, the idea of savoring something ordinary, something that felt out of his usual realm of exclusivity, and so he joined the line. The aroma of sizzling meat and spices filled the air, making his stomach growl even louder. As he moved closer to the cart, the vendor, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, greeted him. "What can I get you, sir?" the vendor asked. Before Richard could respond, a voice, small but urgent, broke through the noise. "Don't eat that," the voice cried. Richard stopped in his tracks and looked around. It was a young boy, no older than 10, standing near the edge of the sidewalk. His clothes were ragged, and his hair was matted, his eyes wide with a kind of intensity that Richard rarely saw. The boy's voice was filled with panic, and he was staring directly at Richard, his gaze unblinking. Richard, initially startled, chuckled. "What? Are you talking to me, kid?" "Yes. I'm warning you," the boy shouted, taking a few steps closer. "The meat in that taco is poisoned." A cold shiver ran down Richard's spine. He glanced at the vendor, who had frozen, the tongs in his hands suspended in midair. The crowd around them had also quieted, sensing the tension. The boy's face was pale, his expression one of pure dread. "Poisoned?" Richard scoffed, trying to mask his unease with a chuckle. "Kid, you're just hungry, aren't you?" But the boy shook his head vigorously. "No. I'm not lying. I swear. The meat, it's not real. Please, you have to believe me." The crowd began to murmur, some people backing away from the cart, others eyeing the boy with skepticism. Richard's curiosity had now shifted to suspicion. Why would a homeless boy be so desperate to warn him? What could he possibly know? "I think it's time for you to go, kid," Richard said firmly, his voice cold as he turned back to the vendor. But something in the boy's eyes made him hesitate. The boy took another step forward, his small hands trembling. "The man who owns this cart," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "he's not who he says he is. He's working with someone dangerous. They're using the food to control people, to make them do things they wouldn't normally do. And it's not just this cart, it's all over the city. Please, listen to me." Richard's heart skipped a beat. His mind began to race. This sounded insane, of course, but there was something about the boy that struck him as truthful. The fear in his eyes, the urgency in his voice, it was all too real. "Kid, what are you talking about?" Richard asked, leaning in. "What do you mean they're controlling people?" The boy's gaze flickered to the vendor, then back to Richard. "The food, it's laced with a chemical, something that alters your mind. It makes you docile, like a puppet on strings. It's a test. They're trying it out on the poor, the homeless, the people no one will notice. But soon, it will be on everyone's plate." Richard felt a cold rush of fear. The idea was too fantastical to believe, but his instincts, honed from years of business dealings, told him there was something more to this. "I've seen it," the boy continued. "People who eat the food, they change. They lose their willpower. They stop thinking for themselves. And that vendor, he's just a front. It's all a cover-up." Richard's thoughts raced as he turned to look at the vendor, who was nervously wringing his hands, his face pale. Was this really true? Could the boy be onto something? Or was this some kind of bizarre delusion? Suddenly, a harsh, commanding voice interrupted them. "Boy, you're wasting time." "Leave the man alone," said a tall figure who had appeared from the shadows of the alley beside the cart. The man was dressed in black, his posture imposing, his face hidden by a dark cap. Richard instinctively felt a chill down his spine. The boy stepped back, visibly scared, but he didn't stop speaking. "Don't let them fool you. He's working for the people who want to control the city. They're using these little carts, spreading the chemicals all over. They're starting with the homeless, but you're next. You can't trust him, none of them." The tall figure took a step forward, and the crowd parted as if in fear. Richard felt his pulse quicken as he realized just how serious this situation was. "I said, leave him alone," the man repeated coldly. Richard's instincts kicked in. This wasn't just some street hustle. There was something much darker going on. The boy's warning, his knowledge of the cartel-like operation, the strange figure who seemed to be a part of it all pointed to something sinister. Richard didn't know who to trust, but the boy's warning had shaken him to the core. The man in black stepped toward the vendor, his face tightening in a way that made Richard nervous. It was clear now that this was no ordinary food cart operation. Something bigger was at play, something Richard had never even considered. "Kid, go!" Richard shouted, his voice urgent. "Get out of here!" The boy hesitated, but then, with a look of relief, he darted into the crowd, vanishing into the chaos of the busy street. Richard, his heart racing, turned to the vendor. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice low but filled with authority. The vendor's eyes flickered nervously. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. Please, just let me serve you." But before he could finish his sentence, the man in black lunged forward, grabbing the vendor by the arm and pulling him away, disappearing down the alley. Richard stood there, frozen, his mind reeling from the encounter. His first instinct was to dismiss the boy's warning, but something told him not to. He couldn't shake the image of the boy's terrified eyes. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy, the vendor, and the strange man in black. Something was happening, something that was bigger than he ever could have imagined. The next day, he had his security team investigate the food cart, tracing its origins. What they uncovered shocked him. The vendor wasn't just a vendor, he was a cog in a much larger, highly secretive operation. The food was indeed laced with a chemical compound designed to manipulate people's thoughts and actions. The operation was part of a covert project being funded by powerful corporations, testing new ways of controlling the masses without them even knowing. The boy, it turned out, had been one of the first victims. He'd escaped the grip of the drug's influence and became aware of what was happening around him. His warnings were the only thing that saved Richard from falling prey to the same fate. From that moment on, Richard Caldwell's world was never the same. He used his vast resources to expose the operation, and the truth was revealed to the public. But even as the authorities moved in, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that the boy, who had warned him so fervently, had known something he didn't. And as he looked out over the city from his penthouse office, he wondered how many other people had already fallen victim to the same sinister forces. The homeless boy had saved him. But now Richard realized that the war for control of minds had only just begun.